In 1943, during World War II, Hitler was building large, fortified prisons and putting war into them. One of these prisons was named Stalag Luft III. In this prison, a prisoner named Roger entered. This prisoner decided to escape from prison, but the strange thing is that this prisoner did not decide to escape alone, but he decided to escape more than 200 prisoners in one night, and this plan that he implemented made Hitler crazy. Today's story is full of suspense and genius planning to escape from one of Hitler's most improved prisons. You must watch the video until the end so as not to skip any important details in the story from 1939. Until 1945, the world was in World War II, and Germany, under the leadership of Hitler, had occupied almost all of Europe. At this time, he was building prisons, or things like camps, in which he'd placed prisoners of war. One of the camps in which our story took place for today was called Stalag Luft III. Stalag Luft III was a notorious prison camp in World War II. Every prisoner tried to escape from other camps and they caught him. They would take him to this camp so that he could not think of escaping again. This camp was built on ore, and this makes it difficult to hide the tunnel. The camp is also in a sandy place, and the sand makes it difficult to dig a tunnel in it. There are also underground microphones that hear any sound or vibration underground. That is, if someone thought about digging a tunnel, they would discover it immediately. This is all underground. As for above ground, there is a fence surrounding the camp, and there are many towers. There are guards in the surveillance, and they have weapons and rifles. They have orders to shoot at anyone who tries to escape. These towers are guarded 24 hours a day, meaning there is no hour. There are no guards, and even before you reach the fence, there are alarm wires. Anyone who tries to cross that line is killed immediately, but there is a pilot who is thinking about escaping, and not only escaping alone, but also 200 people are harmed with him. He wants to get these 200 out of this prison. This escape operation is so large that it could disturb the German front. This man is the commander of the Royal Air Force Squadron. He is 33 years old. His name is Roger Bushell. Roger Bushell was born to an English family in South Africa. He joined the Royal Auxiliary Air Force. He was a squadron commander when the war began. His first mission was to lead a secret unit to France. Then the air war ended for Roger before it began, because he was shot down early that day. In one of his first missions, the German forces arrested Roger and took him to one of the camps, but no camp was able to contain Roger, because he was always planning to escape, and one time he tried to escape, and a strong personality pushed him to head the escape group. As long as there are prisoners of war, there are always plans to escape, and there are always you find people planning to escape. Roger tried to escape from prison several times, some of which were an individual attempt and other attempts with other individuals and groups, but the time that really got him into trouble was the time he escaped with a colleague from the train, and his colleague was Czech. So their goal was to head towards Czechoslovakia. In Czechoslovakia, Roger and his friends found a local family that was sympathetic to the Allied forces. The only mistake they made was that they found themselves in Czechoslovakia. At exactly this time, a Reich negotiator had been arrested in Czechoslovakia. Then the entire country went into a state of lockdown. Everyone who was suspected of anything was arrested. Among them are Roger Bushell and his friends. The local family, Czechoslovakia, hosted Roger and his friends. One of the people tipped them off to the police. Then they came to them, arrested them all, and executed them. They did not leave anyone behind. When Roger learned about this matter, Roger not only became angry, but he became completely heartbroken. And this increased his hatred for the Nazis, which increased his hatred for the Nazis. She became almost ill, and then Roger became obsessed with doing anything he could to disturb, undermine, and disrupt the forgotten system. Roger was taken to the only place where Zahn thought they could imprison him, and this prison was Stalag Luft III. This prison or camp was located in Rzeszów, Poland. Stalag Luft III was a camp, new and newly built. Its aim was to bring prisoners who had previously tried to escape from other camps and put them in this camp. Because it is a fortified camp and it is impossible to escape from it at all. But this did not stop Roger and did not prevent him from planning and thinking about escaping. Immediately after his arrival at the camp, he became the leader of the escape group. Roger was the mastermind of the operation, but he was not alone. This Jersey was an engineer. Tim was a forger of documents, any document or any travel document he could forge. He is an important person. They will later need the details of the escape operation. Not all prisoners knew about it. Rather, a few men knew about the details of the escape operation. Roger was the one in charge of the escape committee, but he needed an ingenious and real plan to escape, and the tunnel was the traditional and most appropriate way to escape, and therefore the most expected means of escape. But here the Germans knew this well, and were searching the camp every day for tunnels and anything that raised suspicions. The camp is fortified in a very large way, meaning that escaping from it is completely impossible, and Roger and his men also knew this well, and that is why he devised a genius plan to create not only one tunnel, but 3 tunnels. The idea was here: if the guards found a tunnel and destroyed it, they would never think, nor would it occur to them, that he would find another tunnel. And another. In this way they will provide shade and be able to maintain another tunnel. At the same time, we had a special team to search for the tunnels every day, and these guards were highly trained and had great experience with prisoners and trying to steal from other prisons. But one of the things that Roger succeeded in here is the extent of its importance and secrecy. He was trying to keep the plan a complete secret and did not reveal everything, to the point that they named these tunnels. They called them Tom and Harry. They did not want the prisoners to ask them and tell them how work is going on in the tunnel today, so he came up with the naming plan. Rather, if they wanted to ask about the tunnel, they would. They say, "How is Tama doing today and how is Harry?" In this way, the guards will not be able to know anything. The Germans were developing a special tactic to deal with escapes and disturbances inside the prison. They would sometimes bring a spy with prisoners into the camp. If a new group was coming to this camp, they would put a spy in its midst. The running part of Roger's plan was the number of large soldiers who would be evacuated from the camp. Most prison escapes involved 12 people, 3 people, or perhaps 1 person. But Roger here decided to smuggle 200. This is a large number that no one has ever done before. His goal was to free the largest possible number of prisoners. Roger also hoped that a mass escape would force the Germans to launch a large-scale pursuit, which would have drawn resources away from the fighting on the front towards rearresting dozens or even hundreds of the prisoners. Roger believed that the escape of 200 to 250 people would create chaos in Germany, and such chaos within the Nazi regime would cause serious damage to the German leadership. But Roger knew that convincing 200 prisoners to risk their lives to escape from prison was a difficult task and not an easy one. One day, Roger gathered them in his hut. He gave them the sermon of a lifetime and said to them, every one of us who is in this room is living our last days. Basically, we should all be there now. The only reason for our survival is to make life hell for them. Then many of them were convinced and began an escape plan. Then they started digging 3 tunnels, deep and long outside the camp. These are 3 tunnels. Only one of them will succeed in digging a way out of Stalag Luft. 3 are very difficult. Firstly, any tunnel must reach a length of more than 90 meters to reach the forest outside the camp. Then they have another obstacle, which is sand and earthquake microphones as well. In addition to that, there was a shortage of drilling equipment. They did not have drilling tools. Also, as we said, they placed a specialized team for such cases. They would search for any tunnel and destroy it immediately before it was completed. Here, Roger created their own spy network. Roger realized that this was the only way to deal with these people. The guards who guarded the camp every day and every hour were watching them every second. Also, this was the only way to evade them. They were kept under surveillance every time they entered the camp. Also, Roger kept these people who were spying for him secret from the rest. It was only 2 to 5 people who knew. These were spies whose mission was limited only. That is, if he saw a security guard coming, he would remove his hat and put it back on again. And when the other person saw him on the other side, he was removing his hat and turning it backwards. This was their job, and they did not know why they were doing this. They were just doing this thing and did not know anything else, but the point is that it was a signal to another person on the other side. He would see him when he removed his hat and put it back again. In this way, it was as if he told him. There was finally, the soil in that place, as we said, was sandy, and this helps them dig, and they can dig very quickly, but at the same time it is difficult to install and may collapse at any moment. Then Roger devised a plan. Genius required removing slats from the beds in the prison. They used to smuggle these slats into the room in which they were digging the tunnel. They used these slats to support the tunnel so that they would not fall on them. But the question here is how they will put them together. Where will they find the hammer and nails? But they did not use a hammer or nails because they are very thick, and the noise was emitting. Prisoners needed panels that fit the tunnel in a large way, and it needed a technique that would enable them to fit these panels together in difficult circumstances, such as at night, for example. It was an easy-to-use system. What they did exactly was that they took captive panels like these and cut these small parts from the ends, and then what? What they were doing was making hundreds of captive panels like this and putting them together appropriately. They were careful not to put everything in its place, because if they had not put everything in its place, the tunnel would have collapsed on them. The length of the tunnel was about 100 meters, but the opening of the tunnel also needed supports, and in total we are talking about 122 meters, meaning a lot of boards, and these boards had to be smuggled into this hut. The captive is not the only thing that the prisoners sacrificed for their freedom. They were allowed to be arrogant and listen to music in the camp. This record player had a spring inside it, and it is metal. When you take it apart from the player, you find it strong and tough. What you can do with his father is to stretch him, and using a file, cut them into small teeth, and in this way he turns into a saw with you. After completing the preparation of the basic tools, now all that remains for them is to start digging. What Roger and his companions also wanted was to dig a tunnel very deep so that the cell microphones would not be able to pick them up. The tunnels are very deep, reaching 9 meters underground. The sand that is extracted requires a very large and enormous area. Depending on the size and length, 125 tons of material and sand were removed. The difficult part of the plan was how to get rid of the sand without the Germans noticing them. The tunnels are under construction, but still. A big problem is getting rid of the sand that is extracted from the tunnel. Everything has become difficult because of the presence of a very long tunnel and the huge volume of this sand that they must get rid of. The big problem also is that this sand was yellow in color, so they found it very difficult to find a suitable place to throw it. There was this yellow sand in it, and the guards were constantly searching for this sand. If they saw it anywhere else, an idea occurred to one of the people to make bags of clothes and glue them to their long underpants. Then they would fill these bags with and go to the vegetable gardens and spread them in that place with this. The method will not be suspected or noticed by any security guard. Few people in the camp knew about the tunnels, and a few also knew about the entrance to the tunnel. One of the most important things in the tunnel is the entrance. One of the important things that the Germans did was to build huts on stilts, and these huts were slightly high on the ground, meaning that any activity under these huts would have been exposed immediately. Under these huts was the plumbing and basic infrastructure. Prisoners were careful to design their opening directly above this sub-wall, which was made of brick and cement. It supported things like the bathrooms. This meant that they had cement and brick pillars around it, and if you were able, of experience and people from different fields, and in this place there was a Polish engineer who had the ability to make cement that you can never see. And he was able to make panels of concrete that served as secret doors. The most creative thing was located under the stove, and this was the entrance to Harry's tunnel. The huts contained stoves were placed on ceramic tiles, which were heat resistant, and what he realized was that underneath that was one of the pillars. They could have penetrated without being seen. They could have moved the stove aside and then gone down the tunnel and put it back in place. There was a cement floor near the chimney and it was kind of dark. What could the engineer do? Make concrete slabs like sidewalk slabs, then remove part of the concrete and match them perfectly. Unfortunately, even perfect accuracy is sometimes not enough to keep the Nazi guards away. One day the guards carried sticks with them. They would insert these sticks into the ground, hoping to find any tunnels, but they did not. They did not know that the tunnels were 9 meters underground. One of the guards was sitting in the hut in which the tunnel opening was located, and during a daily routine, he suddenly hit the edge of the tire where the tunnel entrance was located. Then the soldier got down on his knee and took a piece of cement that he saw on the ground and began to look at it, and suddenly he began to stand up. By moving the tunnel door, then discovering that there was a tunnel, they began to wait. Will they search again for other tunnels, or will they be satisfied with this tunnel? When the guards found this tunnel, they were shocked by the genius with which this tunnel was built. They thought that the prisoners had spent all their resources in this tunnel in order to design it in this way. It was impossible for them to have another tunnel, so he did not search for other tunnels. Thus Roger's plan triumphed in the end. Roger's plan was genius. After a few days, he began to expand the camp and began clearing the forests adjacent to the camp. Then they sabotaged the exit of one of the tunnels. Then Roger decided to stop the work and divert it to a place to throw sand in. The only remaining tunnel was Harry. When they were digging this tunnel, the more they moved away, the less oxygen. Then prisoners discovered a wonderful way to deliver oxygen to this tunnel. They found that metal milk cans were an ideal shape for this tube. They began collecting milk cans and removing the bottom part, and then they glued them together. the way they were able to make a tube to deliver air to the tunnel. They had to search for a way to deliver oxygen to this tunnel. They designed an inflatable system based on 2 bags that they carried with them in their bags. These bags were made of cloth bags. This bag could be squeezed and then a little bit of water was inserted. Then they had to open the bag and squeeze it again. It was like a flute. In this way, they began to pump air through that tube into the tunnel, but this tunnel was very small, and the farther they went in the tunnel, the narrower it became. Then they began to think about how we would be pulled through a tunnel all this distance and to solve this problem. They built a carriage on a railway track in the tunnel, and so they began to descend into the tunnel, ride on this carriage, and go to the end of the tunnel to complete their work. They also faced another problem, which was lighting. A 100-meter-long tunnel would certainly be dark, and they had to search for a way to light this tunnel so that they could complete their work to solve this problem. The problem is that they stole a wire from an electrician who was working in the camp, and they stole the lamp that was necessary to connect it to the camp's electricity source, and they were able to light the entire tunnel. The people from whom this wire was stolen did not report this theft because they knew exactly what was going to happen to them, and that is why they did not tell anyone. They kept the matter a secret. January of the year 1944, the tunnel was almost finished, and Roger and his companions had to create fake identities. Here they had to steal documents from the soldiers to find out what the original documents looked like. Some of the people with them were professional forgers. They were able to forge documents in a perfect way, and they knew how to make the paper old or official, but one of the things they needed was an official stamp, and after searching, they found this stamp on the soles of their shoes. Then they extracted this stamp from the shoes and stamped the passports, and almost every German document required a personal photo. The way they obtained the camera was by provoking the guards. What were they doing? A professional theft person would go and steal the passport, the guards, and then another person comes and says to him, "Listen, one of them told me that you lost your passport." The guard replies to him, "Yes, you lost it." "Don't you tell them that you lost your passport." Then the guard says to him, No, don't tell them." Then they say to him, "Listen, we want some things. If you bring them to us, we will return them to you. Your passport." In this way, they obtained a camera and began taking pictures of themselves and forging personal documents. On March 24th, 1944, he arrived. On the day of the escape, they waited until darkness fell. The prisoners began to gather in order to escape. All the prisoners who had been appointed as dowries, spies, and diggers all came to the tunnel hut. This hut became very crowded, and at 9 o'clock in the evening of the night of the escape, they began to enter the tunnel, and when they reached the end of the tunnel, they took their heads out. They found themselves in a big problem. The tunnel was not very long. They thought they were directly under the forest, but they were not. So when they came out, they were 46 meters outside the camp. It was directly under one of the watchtowers. Every 47 meters there was a watchtower, which means there were guards watching. They arrived at the camp and were armed with machine guns and ready to shoot anyone trying to escape at 10 o'clock in the evening on the night of the escape. They made the decision to continue even though they were under the watchtower, but that was not the only obstacle they had to overcome. There was another obstacle that threatened to end the escape process. When they were in the middle of the tunnel to exit, the Allies began bombing and the electricity was cut off in the entire camp. When the electricity in the camp was cut off, it was also cut off in the tunnel, as there were 60 to 80 people in the tunnel. It was very terrifying and no one wanted to come down because of the darkness. After some time had passed, the electricity returned again. But these delays affected the escape process. This was not the only problem they faced. Rather, at 1:30 in the morning, the tunnel collapsed. It was winter and cold, so some of the men wore a lot of clothes. One of the men was huge. and when he was passing through the tunnel, he accidentally dropped one of the panels, and then the tunnel collapsed. Fortunately, they took him out and he was not buried in that tunnel. They had to go back now and restore the tunnel and then get out, and this delayed them a lot. At 4:45 in the morning, the sun began to rise. The 76 people who had gone out the first time came out of the tunnel and went into the forest and spread out. These 76 had gone out before. The tunnel collapsed. When they repaired the tunnel and finally got out, the security guard discovered them and sounded the alarm. They arrested them, and at 5 in the morning the escape process stopped and the guards discovered the tunnel, and the people who were still in the tunnel returned to the hut. But the 76 people who had escaped in the first had escaped and moved away from the prison and dispersed. In the forest, including the planner of the operation, Roger Bouchot, the plan was for 250 people to escape from the prison, but only 79 came out of the tunnel. 3 of them were arrested at the exit of the tunnel trying to escape, and 76 prisoners escaped from the camp, and even when they raised the alarm, the prisoners had spread throughout Europe and they escaped and got very far away. After 35 hours of escaping, there were 2 Norwegians named Muller and Pressland. They were military pilots. Their escape went very smoothly, and they did not face a single problem. They were on board a Swedish ship after 36 hours of escaping. After 3 days, most of them were arrested. Many of them were unable to escape. More than a few kilometers after 3 months of escape, the third successful fugitive, Bob van der Swack, spent a longer time escaping. He crossed all of Germany and reached his town in the Netherlands. Then he contacted the resistance organizations there and they transferred him to the resistance groups to France. He traveled through occupied France and eventually crossed the country to Spain, and he traveled from Spain to Gibraltar and from Gibraltar to England. It took him 3 months to travel this entire distance, but he achieved great success as a fugitive. The rest of the fugitives did not enjoy this luck. These prisoners who were arrested and returned to the camp thought that they would be put in prison or that they would be punished in a certain way, but they did not think that they would blame Hitler so much when they received this news. He felt angry, and his first impulse was to execute everyone who tried to escape. He was finally convinced to execute only 50 people, and these people were executed in the most horrific ways possible. Roger succeeded in getting out of the tunnel and escaped, and he was traveling by train. He moved from train to train. His documents were carefully examined and deemed to be forged. He was arrested and they executed him as well. Only 3 people survived this escape. This is where our story ends for today.